All right, welcome back. Episode 2, Inner Primary Problems on my 2010 Street Glide. We ran into some unexpected problems. I'll tell you about that in a second. I'll tell you who's here tonight. Mojack is in the house. Brian's in the house. Chewy's in the house. And producer Vinny's behind the camera. So the last time that you were here, we still had our belt drive pulley on and our belt on. But we discovered that this seal here in the transmission was leaking oil. So we had to replace it. So therefore, I had to take off our belt pulley, release our belt, and take out the seal. How do you take out one of those seals? It's pretty simple. Put a couple of wood screws in the seal, get a couple pair of vice grips and put on there, grab a hold of the vice grips, start wiggling them, give them a little pry with a screwdriver, out it comes. Make sure when you put your new seal in that you lubricate it. You can see I used white lithium grease. You can also use the same type of oil that goes in the transmission. But hopefully we won't have any more leaks when this thing is done. We'll find out later. So we're going to get back to it and get the belt and the pulley back on, and then we'll start putting our primary on. So you saw us put our new seal in. Now we're putting our splined front primary drive sprocket back on. You can see this is what drives the belt. Sometimes if you line up the sprockets and you hold the belt in and you pry it on a little bit, you can get it in. We had some difficulties. We had to go back to our rear axle adjuster, slack up our adjuster, bring our wheel ahead a bit, so we had some slack to get the belt back on. We've got that done. We've got it readjusted. This is the big nut that holds your drive gear on. So we're going to torque that up next, and then we're back to the point where we ended part 1. So hopefully from here on out, I'll go smooth. Okay, so we got our belt pulley on like we just talked about. We got our belt pulley nut here. You can see a little mark on it. That's because I marked that the torque spec was to put it to, I think it was 60 foot-pounds plus 30 degrees. So we had to mark it after we reached our 60 foot-pounds so we could get it in the right position. And then on these nuts, there's a big locking plate. And this locking plate just lays in over the nut. And you can see the holes for the bolts in the locking plate. You may have to adjust the nut a little further just to get the locking plate on. That locking plate will keep that nut from backing off so you don't have problems when you're out on the road. So we'll get that locking plate secured now. Make sure you use Loctite on all your nuts and bolts, especially on a Harley, because they like to shake everything out. And we'll just keep rolling here. Getting ready to put the primary on. We got a gasket to go on here. This is a steel gasket that goes on here. You can see it's got a little dowel pin in the gasket, and there's a little spot for your dowel pin right there. and you can see that it's flat on the back part, so that'll allow it to seal. So when you set your gasket up, it goes in there like so. So we've laid our clutch back in place. We've laid our compensator drive unit back in place. We've got our chain tensioner laid in place, not torqued up yet. Still got the cable tie on it. We'll cut that off when we're almost ready here. So in order to be able to put the torque on this bolt here, it's 150 foot-pounds. If you don't get something in between the two drive gears, you're not going to be able to torque it up. Some guys like to use a block of wood. I found that we've been using a block of wood and it just tears it up. So I've actually got a chisel in here. So that should hold our unit in place so we can and there you have it, 150 foot-pounds. We're going to reverse this chisel now. We're going to get in here. Right hand tread, so we're going to turn this one to the left to tighten it up to spec, and then we'll release our tensioner and we'll be ready to put our cover on. All right, so once you get everything back together, you get your primary case on, you get all your bolts torqued up. Before you fill your clutch up with fluid, you're going to have to make your major clutch adjustment. What we've got here is a threaded rod, basically just with a lock nut. The threaded rod pushes in against the rod that was coming out of the clutch, the big long one we showed you in the last episode. So all you do is you put an Allen key in the end of it, and you turn it until you can just feel it touch the end of the rod. So there's no pressure on it whatsoever. Once you get it to that position, you roll it back 180 degrees. Tighten in your lock nut. Give it a little snug with a wrench. You don't have to really crank on it. And your major clutch adjustment is done in here. The rest of your clutch adjustment. So now, a little bit of play that I got here in the lever. Now you get rid of that play by going to your adjuster over here on your clutch cable, and that basically runs a threaded rod, and when you turn the two ends different ways, it opens up to take out the slack or goes together to create more slack. And that's how you adjust your clutch on a Harley. So we're pretty much done now. You can see that there's a little hole right here. That's basically for the end of your funnel. So we'll put a funnel in here. We'll put a liter of good quality primary oil in here. I use synthetic and everything. We'll put our cover back on, get our battery hooked up, our starter bolts torqued in because the starter sits in the back of the primary, and we'll be ready for a road test. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.